Hi everyone. It's been a few days since I did a video for you all. I tried a couple of times to make one and I didn't think they were of good enough quality because time is short. Time is very short. Not just for whether there'll be YouTube channels or even an internet to be able to post things like this to. Time is short just potentially for how things are going to be going. So I don't want to present something unless I think it's got value for you. And given how the response to the last videos from Plato's Cave and Donnie Darko and even the spiritual warfare video, I felt it was important to continue on those themes, to take those themes to the next place. And it took me a while to figure out what I was going to say. What I found was an old version of a chapter that was supposed to be a part of Falling for Truth, my book that came out last year. And for whatever reason, it was a very long chapter, and I just chopped it up and kept pieces of it in the book. But when I saw the original chapter, I thought it's perfect for where we're heading now, which is the discussion of exiting Plato's cave. And really, you can't discuss exiting Plato's cave much other than presenting why a person becomes someone who will exit Plato's cave. We have to look at the dynamics of what needs to occur for you to go from being happy in the back of the cave to going out the exit door. In this discussion, we'll be going over things such as, again, hopelessness. We'll be looking at free will in more detail, karma, being in the now, death, detachment, purpose, aloneness, and we'll end eventually with laughter and hope. Most of this video will be rather dark because that is the dark side of the spiritual path, is becoming one who is willing to leave the cave, who is willing to exit the matrix. That doesn't happen from a happy place. But it will end with hope. And we'll be digging through the Bhagavad Gita in quite detail, why I've listed in the title Arjuna, Bagger, and Donnie, because all three of them represent the Gita. So let us begin with a quote. You are a robot. Your name is Legion. The pain you suffer is inflicted by your own claws and teeth. The joys you pretend are only programmed beliefs of pleasure, worthless checks of an actor's farce. Your knowledge is an ability to read the actor's lines. Religion and psychology are two actor manias, compulsions that the show must go on and on and on. Your concept of heaven is ridiculous. Your hopes of hell are masochistic. The person in the audience is the observer. His name is not Legion. The ultimate observer is one. That was on a Richard Rose lecture poster that he put up at a university in the 1970s. That was on a poster to promote a lecture. Would you get off the couch and go to that lecture? Few would. Real process work, working to leave the cave, is not for robots who just sleep, eat, reproduce, seek distraction, and die when the energy of the physical organism is used up. Some, by chance, trauma, or an unseen spiritual maturity, will gain a new awareness where we can gaze upon ourselves and ask that very spiritual question, am I a robot? The Bhagavad Gita, which is the interaction between mortal human Arjuna and divine avatar Krishna, is a good reference point with which to study the topics to be discussed. All of these topics are central to the modern spiritual community, though few question if the definitions used are what words such as free will, karma, detachment, or control are really referring to. The Bhagavad Gita is thought to be the standalone book of the Hindu religious teaching, but it is actually just one of a 12-book epic known as the Mahabharata, the story of Krishna's interactions upon the earth. And to help unlock its secrets further, I will use two modern movies, Donnie Darko and The Legend of Bagger Vance, each of which are the Gita portrayed in a modern setting. The main characters in both movies are similar to Arjuna. They have fallen. In Donnie Darko, Donnie begins the movie flat on the pavement. We don't know what happened, just that he's on the ground. But from the Bhagavad Gita, we know he's been given a glimpse of a new reality, and it shocked him into collapse. During this confusion is when Frank, of the strange bunny suit representing Krishna, appears to tell Donnie the way the world is and why he needs to get up and launch the war. The Legend of Bagger Vance, which is first a novel by Robert Pressfield, has a main character who's aptly named Randolph Junah, right? Arjuna. The movie, however, turns the novel into more of a Christian story of heaven and angels. But the book is still very clear in its origins. We find Junah fell during the First World War. And while we don't see the moment of the fall, which for him would have been seeing the horror of the reality, we see him afterwards, confused, broken, and unable to face a return to a hero's welcome. So Junah just disappeared, hoping to forget and to be forgotten. Yet just like Donnie, the universe had bigger plans for Junah. Here it was Bagger Vance playing the role of Krishna to get Junah to compete in the golf match in order that he can find his true nature while doing so. Yet these books and these movies are not things to read or to watch. They are much more. Quote, "Don't waste your time on the story of the Bhagavad Gita, the metaphor. We don't care about Arjuna and Krishna on the battlefield. This is not a story about foreign people of an ancient culture clashing for a throne. It is about the people reading the story. But the person reading, it's not about the people in the story, it's about the person reading the story. It's not a book you read, it's a journey you take. And it's not Arjuna's journey, it's yours." Jed McKenna, in Spiritually Incorrect Enlightenment. We are Donnie. We are Junah. We are Phil Connors in Groundhog Day. We are David and Jennifer in Pleasantville. We are Truman in The Truman Show. We are Ahab in Moby Dick. The story is about us, the viewer or the reader. I'm going to try to go through and show a bit of why Arjuna fell. In fact, the Bhagavad Gita is mostly a story of why Arjuna got up. It's very little about why he fell. I'm going to try to explain more in this talk today why Arjuna fell, why you have either fallen or maybe will fall, and the end of it will be getting up. I'll begin with a small bit of what's known as the first step, hopelessness, and then we'll come back to it near the end of this talk. From the Tao Te Ching, the longest journey begins with a simple step. The famous first step of the Tao Te Ching is not meant to reflect the first breaking out of the chains of the cave, or even some moment of realization in the cave itself. The first step is the moment of something that causes us to take that first faithful step down the hallway to the exit. There may have been many steps previous to that, in many different areas, but from the standpoint of realization, from the standpoint of the realization of one's true nature, it is this step that crosses one over from being a spiritual seeker, something in it for me, to a seeker of the seeker. Who am I? The Tao reminds us that it is a simple step, not a single step, as is usually translated. Carlos Castaneda described this moment as jumping into an abyss, the tarot fool striding happily off the cliff into oblivion. That is the moment Arjuna stands up on the battlefield. First he fell and sank into hopelessness and meaninglessness. The world as he perceived it is a lie. And you first must sink before you can stand and take that first step. From the Bhagavad Gita. My members fail. My tongue dries in my mouth. A shudder thrills my body, and my hair bristles with horror. From my hand slips Gandiv, the godly bow. A fever burns my skin to parching. Hardly may I stand. The life within me seems to swim and faint. Nothing do I foresee save woe and wail. No good can spring from mutual slaughter. What victory can bring delight? What rich spoils could profit, bought with such blood? Let's begin our examination of leaving the cave. By the way, I'll be putting this entire chapter, it's 20 pages, it's going to take us a while. I'll put it up on my website later today or tomorrow. I have some editing to do. I, of course, will edit out the errors for you here talking. It'll take me some time to put them into the notes for you to read later. We have been conditioned since childhood to make good choices, to watch out for the consequences of our choices. And from the eyes of the dream that appears to be true, one or two seemingly small choices can wind up taking us down a totally different road than we look to be heading. From the in the dream thing, me, it is good to get as clear a mind as possible in any moment of decision, and to keep our commitment to whatever we might have committed to. But from the eyes of the out of the dream thing, self, we may not be making the choices we seem to be making. And that gets to the heart of one of ego's key parts of the construction. I am in control of and can manipulate everything. But am I? Are the seemingly new roads our choices take us on, perhaps the very road that some other force wants and demands us to take? So many have claimed our human idea of having free will was delusional, since we are but a conglomerate of thousands of factors, conditioning, and programming that has come together to make us who we are right now. Like all children early on, I created an egoic mask to wear. It was made in an attempt to protect myself from perceived external threats, and for some children, very real threats, and also with the idea that I could control and manipulate the world around me with it. Make no mistake, the small child with its cries, pleas, and laughter is partially testing those around them to see what it will get him or her, and if what it wants will be achieved. But at some point, the 5 or 6-year-old child begins to see that it can't get everything it wants, as others are blocking its obvious me first seduction techniques. So the child shifts. They make a mask of whatever needs to be done so we can continue our attempts at control and manipulation, just in a more secretive way. Yet is any of this our choice? Could I have chosen as a 5-year-old not to make an egoic mask when everyone around me was operating through their own mask of control, seduction, and manipulation? Was my very environment only programming me for one thing, to be a seducer and manipulator, like everyone else around me? I had read a lot about the idea of control, but it stayed at the level of an idea until after the experience I had in Johnson Canyon. I never did anything to fall in, and I never did anything to climb out. So I really had to begin to wonder, do I have control over anything, even what I might have for breakfast? So many times I tried everything to reach a goal and failed miserably. It seemed like all of the gods were against me. But could these attempts have been anything but failures? How about other times where I seemed to do nothing and yet succeeded? Could those times again have had nothing to do with me at all, but were programmed? And can you fail at something that some other worldly script has already decided you can't have? Should I really pat myself on the back for my great successes in something that was decided eons previously? Why am I taking my successes and my failures so personally? Could not my entire moment-by-moment existence be already mapped out, and perhaps all I can do is decide to flow with it and not against it? It is why Castaneda claimed in his book that the actions of all people are folly, actions of no meaning or value. As we were acting without knowledge of who was acting and what was being acted upon. Yet upon awake, all of one's actions are still seen as folly, but are now following controlled folly. They know that they are an actor, yet they act as if it all had meaning. It's one of the most important parts of his second novel, one that almost no one has grasped the importance of. Part of the path is to learn to think in a more philosophical or question way, all the while knowing that most of our standard programming of the body-mind is not really going to change. As you observe yourself, you change slowly. You may not even be noticing it. You're dropping away things that interfere with further self-observation. A quote from Richard Rose. No possessor of cosmic consciousness would wish to change anything but his own erroneous view of things. The blueprint and all dies are cast. The program for each robot is cast also. All that one can attain is knowledge of their true nature and some restricted ability to affect things which are not really real, our world of mental projections, which we believe are real or solid. It looks like things like the Bhagavad Gita or Donnie Darko or even the Truman Show is somehow about free will and choices. To our asleep egoic mind, it looks like Arjuna or Donnie or Junah in Bagger Vance could choose to go one way or not. Yet when we start to live these stories, we may begin to feel that we do not have much of a choice of where we go, but we choose our level of observation in those moments. Arjuna will start the war. Donnie will burn down the guru's house. Junah will fall behind in a golf match. I will slip and fall in a canyon. The question is, how aware are we when it's happening? Most modern psychology is based on the principle to try to program the robot into being functional and harmonious. But they never look at the origin of the programming itself. Thus, the true self-seeker does not want to be programmed. The true self-seeker does not want to be reprogrammed to be a happy, functional robot, but to know who or what programmed us in the first place and why. We have to direct whatever energy we have to examine these issues. Adyashanti once wrote, "As long as you want to go left when you want to go left and stop when you want to stop, welcome to unenlightenment." The feeling of taking control gives us a few moments of comfort and happiness, but not really. The stress of trying to control an uncontrollable place returns. When a glimpse comes to people that we may have very little control, they begin to notice a very odd feeling a few months later, that they seem to have lost their passion. This is because most of what people consider our passion is really just their way of trying to give them the feeling of some control over the world. And when this need to control the world goes away, so too do many of our so-called buffer passions. As Carl Renz told me once, it's not freedom of choice, it's really freedom from choice. One significant indication of spiritual maturity is that a person realizes they are helpless, but are not prevented from acting anyway. In the Bhagavad Gita, it claims act, but don't reflect on the fruit of the act. One acknowledges what one can do, no matter how little that can be, and does that, even if later that too is shown to be robotic and predetermined. It's when Donnie Darko replies when asked why he keeps doing these bad things, because Frank makes me, and I have to do it. He saved my life. Another way Rose suggested to measure someone's spiritual maturity is by how they define freedom. Freedom seems to imply having unlimited choices of conduct and opportunity to acquire all the objects and experiences that one desires, with no restriction of capability or circumstance. However, real freedom means to be free from delusion within the dream projection of life, not the freedom to do the things one wants to do. We may see that we don't have free will at all, but it looks like we do. So our only choice is to act upon what looks like we can act upon. To act selflessly without any objective or ambition or motive. We simply try to be helpful and useful and believe things will balance out later. And if it doesn't, that's fine too. The action is a shift from me getting something to me just acting. From David Karse. The ego sense of self spends all its time trying to stay in control, and that means trying to keep you away from the moments of disorientation when the bottom drops out and doesn't know what to do. This is beautiful. Get to know it, to not fear it. This is where we are headed in our world. Karma and the now. When I had met Mr. Park, I've given a bunch of stories of when I first met him, the Korean monk that I spent time with. But one of the stories that always stuck with me, of the many stories that was about him, that was told to me, was in the 1970s he was training some young monks in a temple somewhere in Korea, obviously. And one day he brought in a candle. And he told the monks he was going to show them how he could blow the candle out with his mind. So he put the candle on the table, He furrowed his brow, looked very serious, concentrated, and then all of a sudden, the candle flame went out. He asked the monks, would you like to learn this skill? Most of the monks said, of course. He said, but you're going to have to give up your training for 2 weeks. The regular training you do will have to stop, and you will have to do only my training that I give you now to be able to learn how to do this. Of the 20 monks he had, 18 said, yes, we want to do this. 2 said no. So for the 18 new monks, Mr. Park gave them an entirely new 2-week regimen of concentration exercises to learn how to do this. Then the big day came. All the monks assembled. Mr. Park had all the candles put out. All the monks were to blow the candle out with their mind. None of them succeeded. Mr. Park brought in another candle, specialized candle. He waited, he looked at his watch, he counted down from 30, and when it hit 1, the candle flame went out. At that moment, the monks had learned they had been tricked. Mr. Park was using a fake candle from some novelty shop. He then responded to them that 18 of you decided to give up your training, decided to give up what was important, and dropped your commitment in order to learn some stupid, useless skill in the world. However, 2 of you continued your training, didn't stop. Therefore, your 2 weeks were not wasted. That's, I think, a very important story for all of this cave work and for digging through the stories and the lies we are told about ourselves in this place and the things that we choose to do based on those lies. For example, the ideas of karma and being in the now. Karma, of course, is the idea of cause and effect. Something you do now will influence what happens in the future, and what happened in the past will influence what is happening now. And on a simple level, this appears to be true. And so we act nice all of the time out of the fear that if we don't, some force will come back and punish us. This has been taken a step further by Eastern traditions, particularly Buddhism, with the concept of reincarnation. It states that we were other forms in the past, and based on a moral judgment of how we were, right? A moral judgment, that will determine the life we are living now. If you were good then, well, you have a good life now. Of course, no one is really asking whose book is the guideline and who or what is making the judgment. Humans, of course, are said to be on top of this ladder. So to be a bad human, you will come back as an animal. I wonder how all the animals out there feel about the Buddhist teaching of reincarnation. And both ideas have their roots in 2 separate things. The concept of a separate me that exists in a linear form of time, and that human beings are special and at the top of the manifest life food chain. But is that true? If you want to study the concepts of karma and reincarnation, you'll have to study time. But what is time? What we call time is simply marking a period that the sun rises and the sun sets. Okay, that's not actually true. The sun doesn't rise and set. But something in a standpoint comes up and something in a standpoint comes down, and we mark that. But what if time were different? Without linear time, all events are simply independent moments all of their own. Mind links them together to create the story of my life, or the story of humanity called history. Now, many insights, including instances of psychic ability, déjà vu, the ability to predict the future, indicate that time can be more accurately seen, almost like a complete DVD or a frozen river. In the DVD metaphor, the movie we rent from the store comes to us complete. We, the viewer, remain still as the scenes of the movie change. In the frozen river metaphor, the river is time frozen, complete and still. And we are the consciousness that stares down at the frozen piece of the river. If we walk, time appears to pass, but time, the river and all experiences are always still, always complete. We are the one that is moving. This can be tested in an experiment. It can usually be done in a passenger car, as a passenger in a car or train, but it's very powerful to do it while walking. But if you do it while you're on a car or train, you notice that the scenery, the trees, the telephone poles, the surroundings, they appear to be moving as you go past. But of course, it is you yourself that is still. You are sitting in your seat on the train or the car. The car is moving, in a sense, but you are not. The scenery is not moving. The scenery is still, but it appears to move. But when you do this as you're walking, this is an amazing experience. You walk in such a way of incredible stillness and clarity until you begin to feel you are actually not walking, that you are actually completely still, and it is actually the scenery that is moving past you. You have that first feeling on a train where it's like you're still and the scenery's moving. You get that while you're walking, and it is a most incredible experience because you get this sense of, I'm always still. I'm always at this still point, and I'm fooled. I'm being fooled by the things around me in motion. If time is frozen, then time cannot be changed or altered in any way, only views. We've been trained to see the story of time from front to back, but that's just a limitation of our mind. It may appear that things were born and died, or that one thing led to another, but viewed as a whole, as a one, this is not the case. Just like one cannot view the mind accurately by using the mind, but must be seen from outside of it, so too with time. Only when we can step outside of time and look back on it can you ever know what time really is. From the Bhagavad Gita. I come as time, the ultimate waster of people, ready for the hour that ripens to their doom. The warriors, arrayed in hostile armies facing each other, shall not live, whether you strike or stay your hand. Of course, the secret of karma is that there is no karma, at least not in the way we've been told. Our present decisions do not create future events. Our present decisions create present events. Karma is nothing but the present state of our mind. Now, that present state of mind may have been in place for a long time, figuratively, and it may appear to be coming from the past, but it is only the mind that tries to carry things of time with it. What is not mind is timeless. And like a Ferris wheel, your mental state just spins around until the old state returns, looking new, until we see that the past becomes the present, then the future, then the past again. Thus, we don't need to change the past. We need to change our current state of mind. And in a sense, if we change that, our karma will also instantly change. If there's any punishment going on, it's not coming from some judging deity, it's coming from ourself. The part of the egoic mind that likes to self-punish. Certain groups like to call it the superego or even the parasite. And this part seems to have as its main job doling out punishment for seeming past sins, either what we did or what happened to us. It quite simply brings up an old thought or a memory, what might be called the karma, and then decides, yes, I'm a terrible person and I should suffer for this event for the next 40 years. So it creates illnesses, accidents, get us to do something that complicates our life, makes us misplace key documents. It doesn't matter. You might even say what's going on right now. The world we are currently living in, the suffering that humans are going through, is one giant self-punishment mechanism as a whole. Humanity has been taught for a long, long time that it somehow is bad and evil. It's built right into the main Western religions. And after generation after generation after generation, this has got hardwired into a lot of people's DNA structures. Humans are bad, we need to be punished. And so when the measures that are being put on people, very few are willing to push back against them because at their deepest core, they believe they're a terrible person. They deserve to be punished. Not just individually, but as an entire society, as an entire group, as an entire race. This very concept that I'm talking about now is playing out, not just individually, it's playing out on a massive scale all over the world. Start looking at this a little more closely, and you'll see why this is able to take place. Karma can be likened to a dual state that is constantly trying to find equilibrium. So it might be seen as two factors. You push against any force and it will push back. And that's what's happening, which we call karma. When we push against the dream one way, it's just like any pushed object, it's going to push back. But we burn karma as we burn the mind that believes in this reality, believes in our terribleness, believes in what we've programmed to believe. I then go into a long story about Mr. Park and some German girls that I've told before, but it's in the notes if you want to go and read that. I then also do a large discussion of why reincarnation is dangerous for the spiritual search. I'll just read one quote, and you can again read the rest of it in the notes. The concept of reincarnation allows one to hold the security of me indefinitely and never have to confront the beckoning oblivion. Besides, there is no justified reason to assume that one will be more inclined to face the issues that must be faced in some hoped-for future lifetime than right now. We may reincarnate as a coward in the next lifetime too. The only reason why people experience birth is that they never realized they could stay dead. They maybe feel compelled to play the game again and to go back on stage. The presented answer to all of our problems for quite a while. I'm going to take a sip of tea. The presented answer to most of our problems has been to be in the now. Be here now was the similar worded message back in the 1970s. That somehow, if we can just follow the seemingly sagely advice, it will bring us peace and happiness to our lives. This concept, which is really just increased perception, is something that every human form can benefit from. It is a state that allows the body and the mind to function smoother, to be more aware of what is occurring around us, to notice more omens, avoid some danger, and reduce stress on the body. It sounds perfect. So what's the problem? The problem is the same as the underlying problem that's found in free will and karma, a misconception about time and personal control. Being in the now is usually presented as possible because there's, as they claim it, there is actually no past and future, only a moment called the now. But the catch that is almost overlooked by this is instead of labeling these moments of time past, present, and future, they are all relabeled as now, now, and now. The basic idea of linear time has not been unquestioned. We are always in the now. When we think of the past, we do it now. If we worry about the future, that too happens now. We're never not in the now. We don't ever have to be in the now because we're ever not now. Instead, you should be sharpening your awareness to go looking for the egoic structure that's trying to tell you to be more in the now. And doing so will not lead to more peace. That will lead to more confusion. Looking honestly at the mind will show how unpure it is, no matter how much we try to distract ourselves from being in the now games. Arjuna was fully in the now when he assessed the situation and saw the war he was about to launch would destroy everyone and everything he knew. And he fell when he saw that not just the things he hated were phantoms, but so too were the things he loved. It was this confused moment that Krishna appeared, for Arjuna was now in a receptive state. He was no longer going to defend his self or his vision of reality. Krishna could talk openly, and his words could be properly received. People talk about the need to be here now, but there is only now. They don't know that there's only now. But they don't know there's only now. It's speculation. The same with the idea that we are one. It sounds nice, but they don't know what the experience of we are one is. Once you know that you're everything, politics won't matter. Nothing will matter. So why make a big deal out of something that doesn't exist? And this work of looking through all of our belief structures is not a hobby. It's not something we do as sort of an intellectual understanding or an idea. It cannot be brought down into the body, as many New Agers try to describe it. Wisdom does not come from somewhere to you. You don't go somewhere to get it. You become it. You must become what you seek. And that is why few will leave the cave. They want to create their happy world space in the cave. Happy intellectual importance place in the cave, rather than blow the cave up. I don't know if I want to go into this point. It's very long and detailed. It's a discussion of the importance of death in our lives. I'm contemplating it now. I'll just read a few paragraphs. It's, again, 4 or 5 pages, and you can go read the entire chapter for yourself. Western medicine does people a big disservice by equating death with failure. It's something that needs to be avoided and postponed as long as possible, because it sees death as bad. But death is the only 100% guarantee you have as a form. So why is something that is 100% certain seen as such a failure? Yes, there may be pain or suffering in the body before death. But the moment death comes, and this is often related by nurses who work in death wards at hospitals, remind us that generally the person looks quite peaceful. Richard Rose. Before you die, you will go through a period of terror because you don't know the ultimate answer. Then after so long, you will know there is no sense in the terror. You're going to die anyhow, and you will quiet down, and you won't mind the dying. It's the same even for animals. Again, the lead up to dying can be quite messy, but the final moment is a very unique experience. That is because death has nothing to do with the body. People think that somehow to examine death is naughty, a sin, morbid, or scary, but actually the opposite is true. To really see that death is the only 100% certainty here in our world can create a giant inner force to know what this process is really about. And it helps to start looking now and not wait for 20 or 30 years in the future to begin thinking about it. Part of leaving the cave is to stop being afraid of it and heading towards it. And the first examination is the honest realization that we know very little about it. Something must die for something new to be born. The process of awakening on any level uses the process of death, often in the form of crisis. The death of the old, even, everything we believed, is a type of death. It is for this reason that death must become our best friend. It is the universal force that can sweep away the old, be they beliefs, patterns, actions, or dreams. This is why people can meditate or do all sorts of spiritual practices year after year, or go see a healer or therapist for 10 years and nothing will be any different. You can change every outer behavior, but if the person inside is still the same, if the person inside has not died to what they believe they are, nothing will change. Change must come from the deepest depths. A quote from Black Elk. I looked below and saw my people there, and all were happy and well, except for one, who was lying there dead, and that one was myself. We don't think that death could come in the simplest moment, such as when I went for a hike in the Alberta mountains. But whenever death comes, it opens hidden potentials. And anyone who has survived a near-death experience generally tends to gain a new awareness for interacting with life. The problem is that this new awareness slips away very quickly and becomes just a memory, just like the death experience itself. They will fondly remember the weeks or months after that death experience, how alive and energized they felt. The movie Fearless with Jeff Bridges demonstrates this very well. But this, however, can lead to the incorrect idea that if death is the answer, well, perhaps we should talk to the dead. Today, mediums and channelers make tremendous amounts of money, and they're besieged by people wanting answers. However, when you search very clearly, generally what you'll find are fakes and charlatans. Darren Brown does some spectacular videos where he shows just how easy it is to play the same, and in fact, even more detailed description than the so-called mediums and channelers use by simple misdirection and fakery. When you start giving up talking to the dead, when you realize that, as Christ said, the dead know nothing, they know no more about reality than we know, then you can stop waiting to talk to the dead or stop waiting to die to learn something. You can work to do it now. But you must be focused on this moment. The famous samurai motto, whenever faced with the choice between life and death, always choose death. How about Milarepa? Without being mindful of death, whatever Dharma practice you take will merely be superficial. And what is it, the thing that scares us? Well, it's not the end of the body. That's not the fear at all. If you look closely, no one is really that afraid of the body not being here. What they're afraid of is the futility that death reveals. Death shows us that when we are in its grasp and when we are being honest with it, nothing we have ever done matters. We are all going to die, and it will be as if we never lived. We keep trying to find ways to spin it in a different direction. Some people try to get their name on a building or a yearly award. They are somehow trying to keep their life continuing. And much of everyone's time is spent in some form of distraction, from crisis to crossword puzzle, to try to pretend that death does not have our number, and that each second our number is getting closer. That's why we should be living right now. Again, it's not to wish it to happen. It's not to try to make it happen faster. It's to examine it clearly, to know what this force is, the one thing we know we will face in our life. The more you know it now, the more you will be able to live. If you are hiding from death, you're hiding from life. When you dig in to what a transformative experience it will be, and again, there's no need to rush it. It's going to happen. Then you can live. You can live in a completely different way. Again, the body is not the problem. It's the egoic self and the parasitic distortions. You don't want the body to die. You want the self you've always believed to be to die. When that happens, freedom will come, right? Freedom will come. And this is the form, this is what Arjuna was sitting at. This is a big part of why Arjuna fell on that battlefield. And if you want to go outside the exit door, I talked about this quite a bit. I'm trying to explain in a bit more detail. It is the force of death that's going to have to happen. Not you dying, right? Not the body dying. It's going to be the self you've always believed to be, the story you've always believed, the world you've always believed to be real. That's going to have to die. Because if it dies, what's behind it all can be revealed. The truth of everything can then be revealed to you if all of these lies are not blocking the doorway. And again, I have a lot in this section, so please go read it. A person was at a lecture one time, and he asked Rose, "You said once that enlightenment was dying," and he nodded in the affirmative. And the man asked again, "Then it doesn't sound like a very pleasant experience." And he replied, "I never said it would be." You pick up a book about Zen, and you read about Satori, the wow experience. A fellow says, "I went to such and such an ashram, stayed there so many months and years, and one day, wow, I knew it. And I had a beer with the headmaster, and we went away laughing together because we got it." That's not awakening. That's not enlightenment. Because if this man had had experienced enlightenment, they would have carried him off in a stretcher. It's that drastic. You don't die and then laugh and say, wow. Death is more final than that. When death comes for an ego, you go, oh boy. You think you're going to die forever. And it's good to think that, because it kills the ego. When a person feels they're starting to die, they drop all the egos suddenly. And then this Nisargadatta Maharaj. Once you know that death happens to the body and not to you, you watch the body falling off like a discarded garment. The real you is timeless and beyond life or death. The body will survive as long as it is needed. It is not important that it should live on forever. And most spirituality, most everything we know, is a distraction from this examination of death. In fact, it's why people come to nice, happy satsangs in the first place. They don't want to have to see they've been running from their awareness of death their whole life, and that their spiritual journey has never even started. No longer running from death is to finally start to look honestly at where we are and why, and to really acknowledge why we currently don't know very much of the whole process. It's appropriate to remember that Christian monks kept their own coffins in the room where they slept, to be a constant reminder of their own inevitable death, and thus not to be lazy and intensify their spiritual practice while they are still alive. If you knew you were going to die tomorrow, what would you do today? So why are you not doing it? The door of life can shut down at any moment, and grasping that will be to send your false bullshit life into a semi-meltdown. And if not death, it can then be a likely depression. The road to awakening is a process of breakthroughs. Simple things that don't look like peace and love, but a massive breakdown. Yet a willingness not to run from this, expecting the answer to self we've been looking for, that somehow on the other side we keep going. The end result of this experience of what we believe to be me will become very different. Detachment. I have a whole section as well on the idea of detachment, that it's very, if I simplify it for you, that it's an incorrect idea to believe that detachment is a practice you somehow do, that it's somehow if you just give up some clothes or give up the booze you drink or give up the cigarettes you drink, that somehow you're advancing in a massive way. Now you are doing things that are helpful to the body, of course. If there's something negative, that's positive. But that's not detachment. It's not something you do. Detachment happens when the world is shown to you to be not the way you thought it is. When Neo finally sees the Matrix. How do you want, or how do you need something when you find out it's no longer real? I share with you another story. This was another story of Mr. Park. One morning he'd been cooking breakfast in his home. He lived alone. And a man came in with a gun. He claimed that he was the husband of a woman that Mr. Park had been working with. And he was accusing Mr. Park of being in a sexual relationship with his wife. Mr. Park looked at the man, looked at the gun, looked at the breakfast, and he decided in that moment it was the breakfast that demanded his complete attention. So he went back to cooking his breakfast. The man with the gun was not really his focus, and now the man was stunned. He grew confused and frustrated, and finally the man collapsed on the ground, crying and bawling. Mr. Park finally went over to him, touched his head, saying, "You look very troubled. You should come back tomorrow and see me so we can start healing you." That's detachment. When you are not frightened anymore by anything in the dream, nothing can frighten you. Your focus is what needs to be focused on in that moment, whatever it is. That's a real good example of true detachment. Next comes a segment on purpose and meaning, but I'll leave that for you. To finish with a very distinct, important understanding. I'm also skipping aloneness to keep this talk somewhat presentable. So please read the text. The last segment of the dark stuff, which is hopelessness. Seeing our utter hopelessness and meaninglessness is an important part of the path. Depressions will become typical, since they'll become no longer anything to cling to. It is the depression of starting to see the void, the vacuum, the emptiness. The foundation has fallen, hence the idea of free fall. Grief is another common reaction, as is anger or rage. What is happening is that the ego is beginning a slow and painful suicide. Most spiritual work is the very act of keeping one from the first step. We get small glimpses of truth, enough to see the great mountain of false we've been under. But being depressed, and especially certain types of depression, are very powerful moments, especially when the depression is linked to seeing the meaninglessness of existence. Most just find reasons to pop out and play fairy tale. Others pop themselves full of pills because some professional says depression is bad. But then something else will plunge them right back into the same place. But depression is one of those trap doors we can use to see reality as it is actually. And that's why the establishment must stop all such peeking. Regarding despair, it is the next lesson. Despair is just part of the formula for cracking your head open. The purpose of spiritual work is not to comfort the ego, but to expose its very nature, which is suffering, and then negate it. What we really long for can only be found on the other side of that negation, not in further affirming the validity of the source of the problem. That's a really powerful statement, and I'm going to read it again, because I hope you can fully hear this and understand it. Regarding despair, it is the next lesson. Despair is just part of the formula for cracking your head open. The purpose of spiritual work is not to comfort the ego, but to expose its very nature, which is suffering, and negate it. What we really long for can only be found on the other side of that negation, not in further affirming the validity of the source of the problem. This seeing of personal helplessness, that I may have no free will and I'm a robot, and then the hopelessness of humanity around us, that there's basically nothing we can do to help our fellow men and women, that everyone is caught in the trap of the dream, and no matter what manner of shaking, yelling, wishing, or praying will really do anything to help that. That is quite a shock when it comes to you. That's part of the shock of Arjuna falling to the ground. And these experiences push us closer to what is called the dark night of the soul. It's the most complete and dark part of the first stage of the alchemic process known as Negretto. Most have come to believe that this means some sort of depression or some sort of difficult life circumstance that they must fight through so they can become better and stronger people. But the dark night of the soul is the first step. It's where we see all of the so-called beliefs, and especially hopes and dreams, have been nothing but egoic lies. This is not depression. The dark night of the soul is seeing the total helplessness and lack of meaning as a fact. The Quran asks, how can you step from the top of a 100-foot pole? This is similar to the Buddha when he goes to sit beneath the Bodhi tree. He could do, in a sense, the Buddha had tried everything with no real success. And his going under the Bodhi tree was not another form of practice. It was, in essence, giving up. He knew there was nothing more he could do, so he just sat down and, well, just sat down. He was finished. But it was in the giving up. It was in the complete surrender, which again is not an action, right? When I talk about what surrender is in the force of detachment. And you don't surrender as an action. You surrender because you've been beaten to the ground. You basically you can't get up. It's over. Your attempts to control life, your attempts to control everything have ceased. Even your attempts to get an answer have ceased. You give up. Properly. Totally. That's surrender. I read another quote that Rose gave. This was from David Gold's book, in which a man who had gone through this very same Arjuna experience had called him, and the two of them had a discussion where Rose tried to explain that he was actually in a good place, that the brokenness had value. And this is how he explained it the next day. Nick is scared and confused right now. It's a pretty traumatic thing when you wake up and realize you've been living your life as a shadow in a stranger's nightmare. For a while you are suspended over an abyss. Not here, not anywhere else either. You're seeing that your mind does not exist, at least as an individual unit. It's just a matrix, a port to that larger dimension that anchors into it. Yes, that total loneliness is what takes you away from all of your contact with relativity. It comes from the realization that your essence is separated for all time from all of your loved ones and all of your attachments to the old world. Of course, you're scared. You're afraid that if you let go, you will crash into the sides of the bank and everything will fall apart. But believe me, you will find that everything keeps moving as it should. even better than if you were trying to control it. The first step, what it really is, can be experienced as a gigantic inner energetic explosion, where the deepest level of conditioning in the DNA in the cells is getting blown up. U.G. Krishnamurti called it the calamity. Karl Renz called it his hell. Suzanne Segal called it the bus stop. And it can feel like the most pain imaginable. It is the Christian hellfire, that which will burn everything from the form that believes it is separate and important. It is pure grace, but not the grace that loving people think it is. Grace is the alchemic fire. The body is, of course, freeing itself from thought and the stored up aspects of thought. And only when death is walked into can all that's been happening to the body be changed into something permanent. Everyone who's truthful about their awakening experience talk about this period where the body suffers greatly, where the entire form is getting blown out. Everything holy, special, and important gets burned out as well. And it just leaves the shocking realization and the freedom of what is. The end of what comes when the first step is over will, of course, be the end of separation. As Karl Renz said once, when grace comes, most people try to run away from it. They don't expect it to be so merciless, so relentless and overwhelming. Grace gives you nothing and takes away everything. This feeling or this experience of total aloneness and emptiness that can happen may send some people to a hospital. There are many hospitalized people who've been taken there because they had an awakening. They couldn't handle it. And it's similar to that experience when Donnie finally gets up the courage to ask Frank in the movie theater, "Why are you wearing that stupid bunny suit?" And Frank responds in a very Krishna-like form, right? "Why are you wearing that stupid man suit?" The glimpse into the deeper reality is not a problem. The problem is that we're seeing absolute reality. We're seeing totality with an individual mind that is bent on our own control and our own fear. And until we can remove that particular mind to see absolute reality with that which is a much more deeper form of us than our mind, it's always going to be painful. It's always going to be difficult. There will come a time when in the experience of absolute, it will no longer be an experience. It will be a non-experience because there will be no separation, right? As long as there's separation, there will always be the possibility of pain and suffering in the experience because there will be a sufferer and something to suffer with. A true experience outside the cave cannot be an experience. It's where Plato's story, to me, hinges on the fact that he's still not giving you the totality, that he's giving you that the person has not gone into absolute reality, they've gone into a deeper form of the matrix because it's defining experience. There's defining experience. When separation goes, time and space go, and there will not be experience, it will just be what is. And when one returns to separation, when one returns to the material world, though, there will be this underlying memory of an experience that was not an experience. It's very hard to describe to you. And you can't think, again, you can't think of taking the first step as something you're going to do, right? I talked right at the beginning. The proper translation is it's a simple step. If you keep thinking that the translation is a single step, it gives you the idea that you have control, that you can take the first step as an act of will, that all the things I've just described, the incredible destruction of everything you've believed, is somehow something you can do. And as long as you think that you're the one jumping in the abyss, the jump will never happen. The jump into the abyss is part of total surrender. It'll be something that is beyond our control, beyond even our wanting. And that's the point. The first step, or even a glimpse of where all this leads, is not something you can do. In a sense, the fire starts on its own. Arjuna had no control over the time or the place of his fall. It happened when it happened. Junah had no control over World War I. Donnie Darko had no control over the plane engine falling out of the sky when it first happened. It just happened in the moment, and then everything changes. Now, the period following it can be quite strange, and any attempt to control a process that one has no control over is going to be painful. But once you finally stop being a seeker of everything except one thing, the seeker itself, it's the seeking of the seeker that is the result of the hellfire. That which has burned away everything, but that focus. It starts with surrender and it ends with surrender. But again, it's not surrender you can do or something you can control, because that would not be real surrender. We create a vehicle that is ready should surrender come about. And then a new type of joy can appear when the existence ceases. I then give a section on laughter and humor. And I'm going to post that to a video tomorrow, along with a small section for you to read. Because laughter becomes an important part of this process. The only way you can deal, in many cases, with how difficult it all really is, how hard the process really is to laugh about it. The more you find laughter in the difficulty, the more calm comes. It was one of the things Mr. Park did with us in my long training time with him, is we used to have a morning session with him. And we would go in, we would lay down naked, face down naked on a table, and he would smack our back with a rice spoon, with a wooden rice spoon. And I talked eventually what he was really doing with this rice spoon, what he was actually hitting. But one part of the whole process is every time he smacked a point, we were supposed to laugh. And some of the smacks were quite painful, some of the smacks were, you hardly noticed them. It all depended on what sort of memory or stored poison or something that he was hitting, right? But the key point of this process was the laughter. And the point was, the more painful life gets, the more difficult life gets, the more you should laugh. Not only because of the physical side of laughter, right, of releasing the endorphins, of really cleansing and healing the body, right? A lot of, what was the healer? Was it Bearheart? I think you said that. It was, gosh, who was that? But it was someone just basically saying that you know, the whole real point of a healer is just to calm the patient down, to make them feel safe and comforted and have a bit of humor, and then the spirit can come and heal. That the spirit will do the healing when the person is receptive enough to accept the healing. And that laughter is a big part of that process. And so the story goes that a man who had been doing this training with us for much longer than I had been there. And a month after I had met him, something happened to his business, and his business was destroyed. He went bankrupt. And he was in agony. He was crying on the ground. He was in complete pain. And he remembered what Mr. Park told him. So he went in a closet. He locked himself in a closet, and he started our laughing practice. And he just laughed. He said it took him 45 minutes, 50 minutes of continuous laughing. And when he was done, he said he had no more problems anymore. Of course, he was still bankrupt. He still had no business. He still had nothing. But the problem was gone. He had laughed the pain away. And I don't want to laugh for you now, the kind of laughing we did, because it wasn't ha ha ha. It wasn't loud. It was a laugh that came from the depths of your stomach, the deepest point of your being. If I actually did it now, I would probably scare you, and I would certainly scare the people in the complex where I live in, because it would be heard. When we did our laughing, I guarantee you they heard us down the street. They thought we were, insane people. But I guess that was part of the comedian life that I lived, was every time my audience was laughing for that small moment, they were getting a break from their hopelessness. Again, the laughter and the humor is not made to fix the problem. It's not made to eliminate the first step. It's made to, or eliminate the challenge. It's made to make it manageable. It's made to make the blowing up inside the cave manageable, so you still have the energy to keep moving forward, to not stop, to make it to the exit door. I will end with a section on hope. The soul, with a strong and constant calm, takes sorrow and joy indifferently, lives in the life undying, that which can never cease, that which will not exist. Life is, it cannot be anywhere, by any means diminished, stayed, or changed. Never the spirit was born, never will a spirit cease to be. Never was time, it was not. End and beginning are dreams. Bhagavad Gita. And so far this entire talk in this chapter may have seemed depressing, detailing helplessness in the dream state in its complete form. To show you what made the world's greatest warrior, Arjuna, fall into a crumpled heap on the ground. But again, the story of the Bhagavad Gita is not really why Arjuna fell. The story of the Bhagavad Gita is why he got up. And the other side of all of this path is that there's hope. It's just not the hope we always hoped for. Faith and power work a bit differently than we've been led to believe. My entire video that I did on this idea of betweenness and using it in practical ways is a huge part of the doorway of this transformation. So are the forces that people might call angels, guardians, power animals, helper spirits, inner guidance. There does seem to be something here that can help us overcome the many blocks and obstacles in our path. And you might say, I should say this better. They're not doing the work, right? They're just a connection point to get to our own inner power. This is all about you. Walking outside, no one can walk outside the cave for you. No one can give you the power and energy to do it. It comes from you. It comes from your own deepest self. It comes from every bit of resource that you have. Therefore, you only really have to learn to have faith in one thing and one thing only, yourself. And I know that sounds like some self-help Tony Robbins Guru magazine program. I don't mean it like they mean it. I don't mean your will or your ability to control or manipulate or force or intellectualize or manipulate. The real hope comes when you recognize the deep power that actually exists within you right now. The deep power that you've always had and have been divorced from, cut away from most of your entire life. You had it as a very small child. You still didn't know how to use it yet or what to do with it or why you should use it, but it was there. And as various traumas and problems and control mechanisms of the world took us away from that. The entire part of Arjuna falling down is in some way designed to rip away all of the things that have taken us from our inner power. Krishna is not the one who makes Arjuna stand. Krishna is the one who helps Arjuna see everything that has been ripped away, everything that has been torn from him is not really him. And it's going to be from Arjuna's own deep inner power, his own deepest self, is what makes him stand and launch the war. Right? This is not a call to love ourselves or to make ourselves moral and perfect to receive this inner help. This is not the standard idea that there's something or someone that's going to judge us and base us on how good we are. And if we don't get something, we must have been bad boys or bad girls. Instead, this is seeing that we already possess that which we need to obtain that help. On one hand, yes, we are programmed robots, but on the other, magical creatures of possibility. And this paradox cannot be understood by the mind. And while we are totally focused on the world of the matrix, our magical possibilities are quite limited. Yet by coming to understand perception, the urging force can be harnessed to effect changes in our reality and our self. And while still being a helpless robot, things can in fact be changed for the robot. But you're going to have to prepare for a new battle ahead. You're going to have to prepare for what's coming if you want to leave the cave. We're not looking for happiness or to manipulate and control. We're looking for places that we can take a rest. And we welcome these moments of calm, of laughter, and relaxation. Places where we can just take a deep breath and go, ah. It's a time where we can look back and see where we've come, to see the battles we fought to this point, to heal some of our wounds, to sharpen our sword of discrimination. But it's to prepare for the next battle that's coming. As Jed McKenna wrote, the only mistake you can make on the path is stopping. So you can enjoy the peacefulness of the rest stop, as long as you know it's but a rest. The work's not completed. The cave has not been exited. If you stop and choose some peace, or choose some happiness, or choose some importance, or choose some control, then you've done the one mistake. You've stopped. You must step around the adversity and finally surrender to what is. I'll leave last with two quotes and then a comment. The first quote is again from Rose. If you can't stand up to a phantom dream character, how will you ever stand up to the realization of absolute truth? We live in a physical and psychic jungle. If you let yourself get pushed around in the earthly place, you will become a coward when things get rough in the invisible dimension. You've got to face adversity in this realm and conquer it. Then you'll have character at least, and possibly the chance to achieve something greater. When you look at the world right now, we see a world of cowards. That's what we see. We see, in many cases at this point, the human race are cowards. It's one thing on the human level. Do you really think any of those people, no matter how great their difficulty becomes, are ever going to make it to the exit door and leave Plato's cave? Are they ever going to leave the Matrix? Are they ever going to choose the pill Neo chose from Morpheus? No. You've got to gain some courage in the dream if you're going to have the courage to leave it. The end of the movie Bagger Vance is a combination of Hollywood and Christian hopes of heaven. The book has a very different ending. I'd suggest you read it. But Donnie Darko is pointing to something beyond. Donnie Darko is pointing to something beyond the wishful hopes that the movie audience hopes to buy. Donnie has finished all that Frank has required him to do, as hard as and nasty as it looked at the time, to open doorways of knowing and protect others. And he ends up back in his bed, just as the movie began, but this time the airplane engine will land on his room with him there, killing him. And Donnie's in bed knowing this, but he's not afraid, nor tries to run from the bed or the airplane engine. Instead, he is laughing uncontrollably. The movie ends with the family in grief over his death, yet they did not see Donnie laughing alone in his room, which was the real teaching tool of that entire movie. Our final quote comes from Royakin, and I hope after all of this challenge and difficulty that I've talked about, that maybe this will give you a sense of pause before you go on and continue your next battle. Too lazy to be ambitious. I let the world take care of itself. 2 days' worth of rice in my bag, a bundle of twigs by the fireplace. Why chatter about delusion and enlightenment? Listening to the night rain on my roof, I sit comfortably with both legs stretched out. Wishing you well. I'll post up some spiritual humor for you in a few days, and then I'll take a little bit of a break. I look forward to your comments on this and hear how your stories are going of where you are in the cave story. Remember, these stories are not about anyone else. All of these stories are about you. See you soon.